Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 6th of July 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And, what news we've got for you? Weather today, really not too good. We've got a variety of reports. Coventry, it's apparently grey. Manchester's raining. Plymouth is pretty grey, although we haven't had rain yet. Rhyl is raining, so not looking too good across the country. And I think we can safely assume it's raining north of the border. Apologies, David Scott and the rest of your team north of the border. There we are. I think we must start today with Greece, really. Events in Greece.
Indeed. So the Greek people said no. 61% no, 39% yes for the in the referendum. So that didn't go too well for the European Union or the markets, possibly not for Cyprus either, but we'll come on to that in a second. As a result, Donald Tusk, ex-Polish Prime Minister, now the European President, has called a Eurozone summit for tomorrow. And the European Commission Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis had this to say. So he said, the European Commission takes note of the result of yesterday's referendum in Greece. We respect the democratic choice of the Greek people. They didn't respect the democratic choice of the Irish people. They just kept holding referendums, didn't they?
Well, that's what they mean by respecting it, is just keep asking the question until you get the right answer.
Okay, he went on to say that the no result, unfortunately, widens the gap between Greece and other Eurozone countries. This is no easy way out of there is no easy way out of the crisis. Too much time and too many opportunities have been lost. The Commission is ready to continue its work with Greece, but to be clear, the Commission cannot negotiate a new programme without a mandate from the Eurogroup. Yesterday's results announce a rejection of reforms proposed to a large extent by the Greek authorities itself and linked to a now expired support programme for Greece. That's a bit disingenuous, but anyway, pretty much what might have been expected. The European Central Bank's Governing Council is going to meet later today to discuss funding the Greek banks so they're going to discuss that by telephone. And as the markets, as you would expect, are trading lower, but despite the fact that things still could go any way, really, so far the markets aren't reacting as badly as expected, but perhaps this has something to do with that, because Yanis Varoufakis, if that's the correct vowel, has decided to resign or has been sacked. I'm not quite sure which. And he had this to say: the referendum of the 5th of July will stay in history as a unique moment when a small European nation rose up against debt bondage. I think that remains to be seen. He said, like all struggles for democratic rights, so too this historic rejection of the Eurogroup's 25th of June ultimatum comes with a large price tag attached. It is therefore essential that the great capital bestowed upon our government by the splendid no vote be invested immediately into a yes to a proper resolution, to an agreement that involves debt restructuring, less austerity, not no austerity, less austerity, redistribution in favour of the needy, and real reforms. Soon after the announcement of the referendum results, I, Varoufakis, was made aware of a certain preference by some Eurogroup participants and assorted partners for my absence, in quotes, from its meetings, an idea that the Prime Minister judged to be potentially helpful to him in reaching an agreement. For this reason, I'm leaving the Ministry of Finance today. I consider it my duty to help Alexis Tsipras exploit, as he sees fit, the capital that the Greek people granted us through yesterday's referendum, and I shall wear the creditors' loathing with pride. We of the left know how to act collectively with no care for the privileges of office. I shall support fully Prime Minister Tsipras and the new Minister of Finance and our government. The superhuman effort to honour the brave people of Greece, the famous Oxy no that they granted to Democrats all over the world, is just beginning. So I have to say I'm not hugely comfortable with some of the language being used in that. He said, for my absence for his meetings, an idea that the Prime Minister judged to be potentially helpful to him in reaching an agreement. So Tsipras is clearly still aiming for a deal with what are effectively bankrupt institutions of the European Union and a bankrupt financial system in the ECB and the IMF and so on. He has other alternatives, no less painful, I'll grant, but much more likely to work in the end. So he's clinging onto the notion of further emergency funding and a bailout. And the question is that because he doesn't have the guts to face up to the Troika, or is it that he's been threatened by his own oligarchs? It's impossible to know really what's quite going on, which is a real shame. Tomorrow, as we've seen in the slide, tomorrow begins this year's BRICS conference, and the BRICS Development Bank will be launched. So they're meeting in Ufa in Russia. And perhaps we'll find out which side Tsipras is on if he actually turns up at that meeting. So the question is, what's going on at the moment? Well, this actually. So this is the Bulgarian lev, and people are starting to trade in Greece on Bulgarian lev. There's also talk about a Bradbury pound style script being issued by the government. That we remain to see what happens there. But in the meantime, they're using Bulgarian currency. Well, Bulgaria shares a border with Greece, but the main reason I suspect is that it has a fixed exchange rate with the euro, and so that isn't going to change in a hurry, and it has been fixed since 1997. So question is, what is going to happen now? I think Greece is not going to leave the euro. I think a deal is going to be done. The jury is still out about whether that's because Tsipras has all, as some people are saying already, are suggesting that Tsipras has been working towards this all the while. I actually don't fall on that side. I think he's probably under significant pressure, shall we say, not only from the EU, but also from some very wealthy people within Greece that have not only a lot of money, but potentially a lot of weapons.
Clout.
A lot of clout, yeah. So anyway, sorry, just before we finish this, I'll just highlight that tonight on the Crane Report, 7:30 p.m, ukcolumn.org/live, Ian Crane will be joined by William Engdahl, and they'll be talking about this exact subject.
Right. Well, interesting times. Personally, I can't imagine that the EU could possibly want to let Greece go, because, of course, the moment one nation goes, other nations can follow. And the idea is to lock nations into the European Union. So it seems to me they're going to fight tooth and nail. And the other thing is, it's been remarkably interesting to see how the mainstream media reports have varied. And thank you for the person this morning who said to me, if you watched BBC, it was all doom and gloom. Greece couldn't possibly survive. The country was going to fold. So the BBC clearly undermining the resolve of the Greek people. But I understand that there were other mainstream outlets that were giving a lot more positive report on it. So it seemed to be pretty typical BBC. But Crane should be good tonight then.
Yes, 7:30, Crane Report. Of course, 9 o'clock as usual for Fracking Nightmare, ukcolumn.org/live. Join us for those. Also at the weekend, this little snippet of information appeared through a press release from the Bank of England. So the UK has some deposit insurance, protection insurance. The Financial Services Authority's successor is the Prudential Regulation Authority, and they have responsibility for regulation of the banks. And they have announced a reduction in the levels of savings that are protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So that Financial Services Compensation Scheme is the compensation scheme in the UK for bank customers. It's designed to protect savings and other deposits. And until the 3rd of July, which was Friday, that compensation was set at a maximum of £85,000. But as from Friday night, that has been reduced to £75,000. So that's what's at a 13% fall. And it also changes the types of deposits covered by the scheme. It actually broadens those out to include corporate customers. So now we're protecting the activities of corporations as well as individuals. Although we're protecting them for less. So the changes have come about in order to bring the Financial Services Compensation Scheme in line with the EU's Deposit Guarantee Schemes Directive, which set the FSCS coverage level at the sterling equivalent of €100,000. And this, I think, demonstrates once again that Britain has no opportunity to govern itself under the present arrangements. As you would expect, some people had some things to say, and Andrew Tirry, who's chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, said that the FSCS was now defective. He said it's absurd that the 16% depreciation of the euro, largely brought about by the crisis in the Eurozone in general and the Greek crisis in particular, could be forcing a reduction in the level of protection available to UK depositors. Of course, that's not really quite what's going on, is it? Because really what we're looking for is more money available in the event of a bail-in. But in parallel with this change, and we should applaud the government because this is brilliant, the Treasury has put in place legislation which will maintain the previous level of £85,000 for a further period of 6 months for anyone already covered by the FSCS. So if you've already got savings, then they are covered at the higher level until the start of 2016, and then everybody moves to the same reduced level of £75,000. Now,
so we should all be happy.
We should all be happy because the government has stepped in to intervene on our behalfs.
Well, good. I'm sure we can trust them completely, Mike, or not. Well, on the subject of money, of course, Britain's police forces have been continually bleating that they are suffering from government austerity cuts. There isn't enough money to police properly. And all of the police districts have been coming out with the same line, that they're having to cut back, they're having to sack police officers, and they're having to literally join forces with other police districts in order to achieve savings. All of these statements have been maintained despite the fact it's now emerging that most of the police areas in UK hold reserves of up to £65 million, which are simply not being declared to the public.
That's each?
That's each, yes. So total figure, multiply 43 police areas by 60 million, and you're getting somewhere in the bracket of the vast amounts of money that the police are sitting on at the moment. But let's have a look at the activities of two particular police forces. And we've got Nottinghamshire Chief Constable Chris Eyre here. He was recently, this is back in January, he was recently warning that budget cuts were likely to mean no more new Nottingham police recruits. He said the force is working closely with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner to meet the promises set out in the Police and Crime Plan and to ensure the community is kept safe. This is a very interesting statement that he adds here. Our Delivering the Future project is continuing to look at the force's structure and shape our resources while facing cuts greater than anticipated. But we do have detailed plans in place to address this. So if we look through this rather convoluted sort of common purpose style language, basically he's bellyaching that Nottinghamshire Police haven't got enough money to do the job. Well, of course, he's not alone, because let's bring in Mr. Sawyers, the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police. And he was recently using the BBC to spread the doom and gloom. So what did Mr. Sean Sawyers say? Well, he said that Devon and Cornwall needed to make £29 million of savings over the next 4 years. They've apparently already saved over £50 million. But the BBC is right to identify that to fill such a funding gap, it will be necessary to see a further sizable reduction in police staff and officer numbers. So there they are, belly aching. Our question is, what have Devon and Cornwall Police been doing in order to get best value for public money? What has Nottinghamshire Chief Constable been doing? Well, let's have a look at the two men together, because they're clearly working down this line together. Here they are, both looking happy and smiling, while they seemingly have trouble managing their budgets. Well, where these men have no trouble managing their budgets is when it comes to child abuse victims and whistleblowers. And over the weekend, I'm sure many of you will be aware that Melanie Shaw was arrested, held for some 12 hours by Devon and Cornwall Police, and she's now been released on bail. And we understand that there have been allegations of harassment made against Melanie Shaw by a senior police officer within the Nottinghamshire Constabulary. So I'll just repeat that to make sure people understand it. Melanie Shaw, who suffered unbelievable bullying, intimidation and threats by Nottinghamshire police officers over the last 6-9 months. All of a sudden, one of their senior officers has made a complaint that Melanie Shaw has been intimidating them. And as a result, Melanie was detained at a local guest house in Plymouth. That was about 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, and then she was held in custody with Devon and Cornwall Police. So if we have a look at that image again, and let's just add a piece of appropriate text, because these are the two chief constables who say they've got no money for policing, but Devon and Cornwall Police could use 4 police officers to hammer on the door of the UK column at 7:30 in the morning, the day after Melanie Shaw arrived in Plymouth, demanding to know where she was. And of course, Nottinghamshire Chief Constable Chris Eyre was the man who authorised a gang of 6 or 7, possibly more, police officers, all with the heavyweight riot-style gear, to smash their way into Melanie Shaw's house. And once they were in there, she wasn't arrested or anything. They simply stayed for a while, presumably to intimidate her, and then departed. So we have the disgraceful situation in UK at the moment that we have chief constables belly aching. There is no money to police properly, and yet they're squandering vast amounts of public money pursuing child abuse victims and whistleblowers. It's horrific, Mike.
It is, and they didn't stop with just basic intimidation, did they? Because they took her phones.
They took her phone. So Melanie on Saturday night was going to be, until we intervened, she was going to be pushed out of the police station at 9 o'clock at night with both her phones confiscated. I think she had £5 in her pocket. So this is a lady who has suffered unbelievable abuse within the so-called care system, unbelievable harassment from Nottinghamshire Police, and now we can see Nottinghamshire presumably collaborating with Devon and Cornwall Police to give her more of the same treatment. Well, it gets even more obscene, and that's the word I'm going to use. Let's have a look at some of the Twitters for Devon and Cornwall Police Gay Association. So here we are. This is Gay Police, Devon and Cornwall, and this is a little bit of their Twitter page. What have they been saying? Well, they've basically been saying this: all people, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, deserve a safe and supportive environment in which to achieve their full potential. Well, that seems, I think,
laudable.
What do they go on to say? Well, they go on to say, are you concerned about someone who might be being sexually exploited? Call or text 116 000 for advice and support. Together we can stop this. So we would just like to say to Devon and Cornwall's Gay Police Association, we find it ironic that you are supporting the very police force which is clearly harassing and threatening and bullying a vulnerable sex abuse victim. This is quite extraordinary. Do these people really not understand, or is there something else going on? Well, as usual, UK column decided to delve a little bit further, and we were quite intrigued with what we found. Let's have a look at it this way. So here's the tweet from the Gay Association from Devon and Cornwall Police, and in that tweet, I know it's a bit small, but there is a number 116 000. If you go looking for that number, where does it take you? It takes you to a website talking about missing people. And this is rather confusing because in the beginning there doesn't seem to be any mention specifically of sexually exploited people. It seems to be focusing on missing people. However, we did notice a particular active link on that website which takes you to the NWG network, and NWG network and Missing People have launched the Say Something campaign to tackle child sexual exploitation. And if you delve into that section, you're told that the good news is that they've teamed up with Nicola Blackwood MP at Westminster. So this is now all being backed by the government, presumably the same government that has a Prime Minister, David Cameron, who tried to block a public inquiry into child abuse. Well, where does that take us? Bring in Stop Child Sexual Exploitation.org, and you'll find that this is their website. Encourage you to go and have a look at some very glossy graphics and images to illustrate the good work they are apparently doing. There are several pages. There's some information on who we are, but we were intrigued. We couldn't find a lot of detail. When we looked further, we have to go to another website, which is called NWG Network, and that was the website that we finally started to discover who was behind this amazing network of people protecting children. Now, remembering the scale of child abuse in UK at the moment, despite the best efforts of the government and all of the charities, we were intrigued to see that we've got yet another network of 550 organisations, and in their own words, 7,000 dissemination points of people who are all protecting children. So, Mike, I'm getting a bit curious now as to how there can be so much child abuse when we have all of these people protecting children.
It's a bit like the same question more generally with charities. When we've got all this charity, these billions and billions of charitable pounds being spent, why we've got so many people suffering in this country.
Could it be the charities not actually doing what they say they're doing, or they're failing, or they're incompetent? Well, we don't know, but the question we wanted to ask is, if there's 550 network organisations and 7,000 dissemination points around children, who has actually vetted all those people to ensure that they are appropriate people to be dealing with children in the first place? Or might we have the situation where people who are certainly not the sort of people who should be close to children are working through some of these organisations? That's simply a question, not an accusation. Well, we took a look at some of the people involved. This is NWG Network. The chair is a gentleman called Peter Stone, and we were particularly interested in another lady called Jackie Kerr. Let's delve into that. Well, here's Mr. Stone, independent business consultant with a wide range of experience of working in both the voluntary and corporate sectors. And he's provided expertise in strategic planning, governance, management, organisational development, tendering, procurement, fundraising, finances, marketing, promotion, change, project and risk management, mentoring and coaching. And he was previously Chief Operating Officer of the Aegis Trust, an international NGO working in the field of genocide research. But he's also worked with wildlife trusts, which I believe was in Nottingham. Not too sure of that, but I think I'm correct. Well, the other lady, if we're interested in have a look at her, you quickly find that she was a former senior policy advisor for the Crown Prosecution Service, and we simply say how ironic that the Crown Prosecution Service that has gone to great efforts to work with Lord Janner was the same prosecution service that had a policy they were going to go flat out to prosecute Melanie Shaw. So I don't know whether Devon and Cornwall Police Gay Association is just unbelievably naive. Perhaps they've been hoodwinked. If they like to get in contact with us, we'll certainly tell them more. But I get a deeply uneasy feeling that the police are encouraging presumably youngsters to call a network of 550 people where we have no idea who these people really are.
I mean, if these two represent the types of people that are operating in these charities that are supposed to be supporting people that have been sexually exploited as children, it's hardly surprising that when Melanie Shaw phoned NAPAC from this office last week that she got such a brusque response.
Well, and let's qualify that, Mike, because what actually happened when Melanie Shaw phoned NAPAC to ask for help was the chief executive put the phone down on Melanie Shaw.
That's correct. And it struck me at the time that if you are operating in one of these types of charities where you're supposed to be giving support to people who have been traumatized, significantly traumatized in their lives, that perhaps they should have a slightly warmer response.
Well, one would have thought that you would have somebody that has the patience and the compassion to deal with people who are in a very bad space, but apparently that was not true from NAPAC.
So is it the case then that these charities are hoovering up a lot of donations and not really doing anything terribly productive with them other than doing research and producing reports? They're not actually doing anything practical on the coalface?
Well, that's the way it appears to me, and I certainly know from speaking to some of those charities personally, what many of them do is just act as sort of gateway organisations. They don't provide any assistance themselves. They're simply supposed to pass people on to other organisations who they claim do help. So it's a very interesting area, but I would say personally I'm highly suspicious of the number of largely unaccountable organisations now clustering around our children. And of course we should see this third sector effort around children now against what we know is coming, which is the equivalent of the named person scheme in Scotland. Very, very dark, nasty stuff. I'll just add thank you very much to everyone who's made a donation for Melanie. Those donations have allowed us to provide accommodation for Melanie. It's also allowed us to buy her some essential personal items and to cover other costs around her being here. So thank you very much for doing that. Without your help, Melanie couldn't be, at the moment, relatively safe where she is. And for those of you who are asking a lot of questions about her, I'm going to say that we have to be fair to Melanie, and there are some things which it is just not right for us to talk about, because at the end of the day, her experiences are deeply personal, and I hope you will just stay with us when we report as much as we can, but we have to recognise on a daily basis we're dealing with very disturbing and deeply personal experiences, and that has to be treated with some compassion and dignity. Well, what are we going to do about all this? Well, many people are out there working hard to inform the public, and we'd like to thank Lancelot for setting up a talk in Glastonbury Town Hall, which is Wednesday the 8th of July, 6 to 10 p.m. There will be 3 speakers, John Hurst, Sandy Wicks and myself, and there will be a lot of topics I think covered, but the heart of it will be Constitution and Common Law, Agenda 21, and I will be doing my best to explain some of what is really happening in this country, which I've entitled This Present Darkness, with due acknowledgement of to the author of the book of that title. Well, if you're interested in Agenda 21, have you read Rotten to the Core, which is an excellent article posted on the UK Column website by Martin Edwards, because he's delving deep into the growing reality of core cities and links through to Agenda 21 programs from the United Nations. I encourage you to have a look at that if you haven't already done so. Well, informing the public and explaining what's happening is, we think, a very important part of countering what's happening in the country. Thank you for the person who flagged up this article. Here we are, The Express, furious Sabine police allowed jihadi to parade banned ISIS flag outside Parliament. Well, of course, the headline is a bit of a lie, because nobody knows whether the person was a jihadi, but did they have a banned ISIS flag? Yes, but the police said that no action would be taken against the man, even though he paraded it outside the Houses of Parliament. And that sub-headline goes on to say, this police decision was met with a mix of fury and bewilderment. Well, we say, of course, this is absolutely the aim of the whole exercise, both the police decision and the subsequent publicity. This is reframing the public mind by causing confusion, cognitive dissonance. And what's really going on here? Well, the object of the exercise is to create bewilderment and confusion in the public mind, as our minds try to rationalise what is an irrational police decision, and we're trying to balance that against common sense. This is the confusion, the cognitive dissonance, very, very dangerous, and it then allows the establishment to pour in more propaganda. Russia would be an appropriate next subject, Mike.
Well, actually, before we move on to Russia, and sorry to come back onto the child abuse issue again, right, but I just want to address a couple of the comments in the chat box at the moment, because some people are once again questioning the Holly Greig story.
Oh, right. Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is as a result of some comments that were made on the Corbett report. Now, I just want to say to everybody once again that we have been working on this topic and this horrendous abuse case for how many years now? 5 years?
6 years.
There is a lot of evidence which has not been made public for obvious reasons. Let me just reiterate what those are. The people on the other side who would prefer to see the Holly Greig case expressed as a hoax give as one of their motivations that the evidence is not made public. A lot of evidence has been made public, some hasn't. Of course, what Holly wants is a court case. Now, she therefore cannot just plaster the entirety of the evidence, put it on the table for all to see if there's a potential for a court case, because that is clearly going to totally destroy any possibility of a court case. So it is nonsense to suggest that there is no evidence. But aside from that, look at all the circumstantial evidence around it, the amount of money that has been spent trying to shut Robert Greene up and so on. But at the end of the day, we have done our due diligence. We know that this case is absolutely 100% correct. And anybody that can't accept that, that's fine. But we will be sticking with it. And we suggest you do too.
Well, that's absolutely true. And what I will add is that I'm afraid there are many people at the moment who are simply doing their research from the internet. And my advice is that if you really want to understand child abuse, you have to get alongside people who have been abused. You have to hear from their own mouths what they endured and how the system subsequently covered up their abuse. There is no substitute for actually meeting the victims and their families. And personally, I find it rather sad that we have an increasing number of people who have never met Anne and Holly Greig. They have never met Robert Greene. They have never met the family in the London satanic abuse case. And they have never met Melanie Shaw or any of the other victims. So UK Column will continue to do what it does, and as Mike's just said, we do our research. That is why we have survived for so long, and it is very, very sad that we have people with nothing better to do than to try and further humiliate victims of appalling abuse. I think I'll leave it at that, because otherwise I may say something which I could regret on UK Column. Over to Russia.
Yes, Russia. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, the European Union foreign ministers extended economic sanctions against Russia until the end of January 2016. And this is supposedly to make Russia comply with the Minsk ceasefire accord with regard to Ukraine. So on Friday, Vladimir Putin held an extended National Security Council meeting. And this is what he had to say. Our sovereignty is not up for sale. This does not go down well in some quarters, but this is inevitable. He said that the sanctions imposed by the US and Europe have not produced the results hoped for by those who imposed these restrictive measures on our country and continue to support them. Recent events show that we cannot hope that some of our geopolitical opponents will change their hostile course anytime in the foreseeable future. Based on this analysis, we then need to make adjustments to our national security strategy. And he said that while Russia was open to cooperation with other nations, it was only on the condition that this does not harm our own sovereignty and national security, of course. But in the meantime, then, they also announced that they intend to push back a little bit if the EU intends to keep going with sanctions. And Finland is clearly being considered as a major target here, because Finland, of course, trades with Russia on the basis of forestry. And this is going to be a major blow to Finland. The industry in Finland is warning. So we've got to keep an eye on this situation, escalating tensions, military tensions with NATO, escalating economic tensions now, because the European Union continuing to keep pressure on economically, and Russia starting to push back. Of course, the economic sanctions, bit of an own goal for the EU, really, because Germany in particular suffering badly as a result of them. But there's a bigger geopolitical game at work here, so it continues.
It continues. Isn't it interesting that we're now at a stage in UK in 2015 when it seems to us very few people believe many of the frontline headline reports from our own media. But as we've said, we know that journalists and reporters are starting to wake up within the big professional industries. If you get an opportunity to talk to these people, please try and educate them rather than just harangue them, because if you go in too hard, too fast, they switch off. If you give reasoned argument, there's a chance they go away to research themselves. Just a bit of a comment there. Well, thank you again for viewers who alerted us to this, which is a spate of deaths amongst successful alternative medicine practitioners. And this article came through to us. We've given you the link there for it, but we weren't able to actually to find out who had sourced it. Otherwise, we would have accredited them. So thank you very much, whoever's put this together. But there's three particular individuals they're talking about. A Dr. Jeff Bradstreet, who was an outspoken opponent of vaccination, and he was aware that vaccines cause autism. And he's been found dead in a river with a gunshot wound to the chest. There'd been a raid on his office by a federal task force, including the FDA, and then suddenly this man is found dead in a river. So what was happening there, we're not too sure, but it's being suggested to us that we should pay attention to this, because it's not one, it's a number of people. This is a lady, Teresa Sievers. She was found murdered on Monday. I think that was Monday of a week just gone, in her home in Bonita Springs, where she'd returned alone from a family gathering. So her body was apparently found at a grisly crime scene. It's been covered by NBC TV News. But the significant thing is that she devoted her life to alternative medicine, and she loved helping people. So what is actually going on here, we're not sure. But there's another one. This is Bruce Hendendal, and he was a nutritionist and chiropractor, exceptionally fit man. He'd run in trouble with the American tax regime, IRS, but he was out and about again and helping a large number of people. Very, very fit at the age of 67. And then he's mysteriously found dead in his car with no known cause of death at the time this article was put together. So what is happening here, we don't know. What we do know is that in UK, equally for America, that anybody who is showing signs of success with treating sickness and disease with alternative medicine is coming under pretty severe scrutiny by the state. Could it now be that the state has decided these people are too dangerous and they need to be eradicated?
Well, of course, in the case of the GCMAF issue, yes, that was not alternative. That was absolutely mainstream. But and scientific, many scientific papers published on the subject, but it was not mainstream big pharma, as it were. Yeah. So that was the problem.
If anybody has got research on that and evidence as to what has or has not gone on, we'd be very grateful to receive that, as obviously alternative medicines is one of the areas that we would still like to keep informing the public about. Well, before we end, just a little thank you to Mr. John Hurst, who I can tell our worldwide audience was birthday boy on Saturday. I won't mention the age, John, but thank you very much for an enjoyable evening and lovely countryside there in the heart of Wales. What have we got tonight?
Okay, reminder again, 7:30 Crane Report, William Engdahl joining Ian Crane, and at 9 o'clock Fracking Nightmare as usual.
Okay, and for anybody with any doubts about what we are talking about, the abuse of children, the picture emerging very quickly is, of course, not just paedophile rings operating in Britain, but paedophile rings who are able to operate through the establishment that governs and supposedly protects us, which is a very, very serious situation. Do your own research. We'll be back online 1 o'clock tomorrow. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.